All right, hi. And you are? My dad helped establish the Church Symposium. Joseph A. Lecture that and my mom was the little old lady who came and sat somewhere in the area.
Yeah, most of my, it's big, yeah, so most of my research is focused on India.
Good morning. All right, hi. Well, we're going to have an open house to share stories and memories on the 10th from about 5 years or so.
It's so fun. Like yesterday I talked about this people called the Karmathians who stole the black stone.
Hi, I'm Janina. How are you?
They just walked into the Cabo in the middle of the pilgrimage, stole it, and we had it for like 20 years. It was like a ransom. Which is amazing.
I can't be sad
Exactly, yeah. So that stuff, yeah, the assassins are really interesting.
And in many ways,
They have one of the best libraries in the world at the time.
Yesterday I was talking about Muhammad, I was trying to explain to my students Muhammad, it's a temporary marriage. They're like,
Oh yeah.
I was like, okay, I don't do it, it's not, I'm from the other group, and then I was explaining all that stuff, and but that's illogical as well. It's a temporary marriage. It's like two people, they miss each other. It might be a marriage between a pious man and a prostitute. Still, it's no sin. Because you tell them
It's legalized prostitution.
it's legalized prostitution.
It can't be. But super interested.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, tell me more.
Yeah, like how do I get less sin? But that's the super bad. Then they go to Vegas, they get married, and then they don't commit any sin, then they break up the marriage. So sin is not committed. That's also happening.
In the Shia world, one thing that happens is like, young men holding each other, going to visit the shrine or so-and-so. It used to be like Syria or wherever, or in Iraq. And they'll go to the shrine, it's a very pious like pilgrimage. But outside of the shrine, they'll have someone set up to like do these, binding sort of agreements that, okay, we have women, signing an agreement that expires after 3 hours or whatever you need. Whatever. Well, because marriage in Islam is a contract. And so
But you don't need
I got to switch glasses.
But for suing marriage, you need two witnesses. And that's when you're like two people alone in one room. What's that? Contract.
No, I got a question.
Yes. Not that one.
Sounds reasonable to me.
I think Malika and I are not so enamored of that concept.
early in um, so my pleasure teaches um, yeah. So that's fantastic. His presentation is not uh so thing in oh say um so so this talk about is an state
Thank you very much. And anytime I mention the word unorthodox, I kind of get a little bit uncomfortable. So it's a pleasure being here. I am almost local. I've lived for a couple of years in Blackfoot, Idaho. My sister lives over there. And I was so scared driving over here because black ice freaks me out. I'm from sunny St. George, where sometimes I sneak to teach my class wearing shorts and Hawaiian shirts. And when I'm caught, I always tell them, this is the shorts and Hawaiian shirt day, anytime I'm caught. So I always try to sneak my way around things. I have been to, this is my second Frank Church Symposium. The first time I went to a Frank Church Symposium was in Boise State, back in 2012, where we were talking about Afghanistan. I am from the tribal regions in northwestern Pakistan. I grew up over there. I left that region in 2000. I went to law school over here and got my law degree in comparative law with emphasis on telecommunications. And then after that, I kept on studying conflicts and laws and global affairs. What I found out, and that's what I'll explain when I say cocktail conflicts. Conflicts are not simple. I call them the classical conflicts were simple. Good versus bad, right versus wrong, just versus unjust. That was a simple explanation. But now, the wars of the present and the wars of the future are going to be civil. And that makes it way more complicated. When I say civil, I don't mean polite. I mean civil conflicts. And I call them conflicts which will be longer, which will be quieter. And by quieter, I mean mostly small arms will be used. Because the battlefield has changed. There will be no battlefield. The war from the battlefield and the war of the present and the war of the future has moved into cities. you don't leave something in between. Scientists and historians research in this space. Lawyers are either in or out. So I make something up, and by the time you figure it out, I'll be gone. So anyways, the title and the background, I will explain that. You might find it interesting. Let's see if the clicker works. This is my lucky clicker. And it's working. One of my two most favorite pictures, Russian Orthodox priests blessing an SU-27. Now, this picture is literally a mixture of two different cosmologies. I call them cosmologies because the Russian Orthodox priests are in a religious cosmology. And the plane is in the classical cosmology, which means in the religious cosmologies you have heaven and hell, and right and wrong, just and unjust. In the classical ones, we have Big Bang. We are told we're going to be destroyed. So it's a relationship and mixture of two cosmologies, really interesting, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more. And then this picture from First World War. The gas mask, and the lance, and the horse. And the interesting thing is, at this time, the belief was that horse will be the queen or the king of the battlefield forever. And this was the last time when horses were used in massive scale. So this is where the old war and the new war combine. So these two are my favorite pictures because they tend to show how complicated conflicts have become since then. When I explain the lecture, I just want you guys to visualize the globe. When I try to understand issues of global conflicts, I try to study maps as much as I can, because then you can have a point from which you can focus on. That circle in there has more people than the rest of the world. When you have more people, they are consuming more resources, and that can lead to issues. It's just like the famous line from Matrix, the movie, where in that movie, humanity has been declared as a virus. That we go, we consume, we pillage that environment, and then we move on to a place where we can have more resources. So that is an image. Another image which shows the lights at night. And you can see, if I can use my laser pointer, no, it won't. No. Africa, the little bit below the northern side of Africa, you will see darkness. The Sahara is there, and that region is called the Arc of Instability. And why is this important? Because this shows that many regions of the world are either in chaos or the development hasn't reached there, which is going to push us more towards oceans. We are moving back to the age of the empires. And when I say empires, I see those who are going to control the oceans are going to control the future. And I'm going to emphasize a little bit more on that. Conflicts in different parts of the world. Only one is improving, and that is the refugee crisis in Europe. In the new conflicts in today's world, refugees have taken a different meaning. Especially in the last year and a half, we have seen the scenario of how before refugees were considered a protected group. The idea was that refugees are suffering. And unfortunately, now we see refugees as a burden. And they are the highest number in history today, which is, I believe, 65.6 million are homeless, which is external and internal displaced people. Why the war of the future is non-classical? Because we have weak states but strong societies. That means Afghanistan, best example. The government of Afghanistan
is weak. It has limited jurisdiction. Today in the morning, still morning, very early morning, I was reading that the Afghan government is back trying to bring the Taliban, the ones with whom they were fighting, on the table. How is that possible? Because the government, the state is weak, but the society is strong, and with strong societies, the link between the strong centralized government and the people in the peripheries is hardly existent, which means any person has more loyalty and more association and more protection, not because he or she is a member of that country, but he or she is a member of a clan, a tribe, a religion. And that means the centralized government has far less control over the far-flung areas. That is, the classical example would be Afghanistan, and I'm going to explain to you guys how. Now, if you study the conflicts that are happening today in the world, you'll realize that those conflicts are taking shape in regions where the state is weak, but the tribes and the clans are stronger. One of the reasons that when I explain to my students is, anytime you see a map of the country which is in straight lines, this means someone somewhere sat and drew that map on the table. This means by that line, anytime there's a straight line, there's a 9 out of 10 chance there's chaos. Pick up any country. This means that that country was part of an empire, colonialism, and then when the colonizers became weak, they gave those countries back, drew the lines, and separated clans and tribes. And since then, those clans and tribes on both sides of the lines are going to be fighting, which means nationality, the passport, is not as important as it's supposed to be. Oceans, sea traffic. To understand the conflicts today and the strategy for the future, we have to understand what role oceans will play. And now, navies are becoming, again, more important the way they were at the time of the Industrial Revolution. This weakness of the state, chaos in different regions of the world, points a unique picture which is that of civil wars. The wars of the future are civil. It doesn't mean that states might not end up fighting with each other. Of course, that's a possibility. But the war of the future is going to be civil, which means the dangerous aspect of that war is there is not a start and an end date. In the classical war begins on a certain date, you can pinpoint a date, and the war ends when you sign a treaty. The Treaty of Versailles, or you sign the Declaration of Surrender on USS Missouri in Second World War. The problem with these wars is they creep up on you. So when something creeps up on you, it's very difficult to get rid of that because there's no one specific point. There's no one specific condition. If that condition is settled, the war will stop. That's what's happening in wars of today, and that's what will happen in the war of the future. I teach a course on war and terrorism at Texas State University. And when students ask me about conflicts, I'm like, Syria, the war in Syria, or in Libya, I tell them I don't have a clear answer. Because at that given moment, I do not know who is fighting whom, who has changed alliance, which group has a new membership policy or changed the name. I have no idea. I was like, just call them civil wars and chaos. That's the only way to understand them, by remembering you can't understand them. That's the problem. Let's look at the case of Afghanistan, since I am from that region. The two covers, why the US will never save Afghanistan and all those kind of things. Why is that?
at the map of Afghanistan and look at the ethnicities in there. And I'm going to confuse you even more. I made sure I pick up all the confusing data and information, so why it becomes a big problem. These are the different tribes and ethnicities that are in Afghanistan, the major ones. There are also minor ones. And now, that's the purple area is the Pashtuns. Pashtuns are majority. I am an ethnic Pashtun, so I speak that language. But I am a Pashtun from Pakistan. This is Pashtuns from Afghanistan. Within the Pashtuns, some major tribes, which means at any given moment, a member of a tribe or a clan has more loyalty to his or her tribe or clan than the central government. And that's just one group. As if that wasn't confusing enough, the tribes, Pashtuns, are spread out into Pakistan as well. Because when the Russians and the Russian Empire and the British Empire could not handle Afghanistan, they turned it into a buffer. The great game and the game of shadows. And then they drew a line called the Durand Line in late 18th century, 1892. And this means that I, as a Pashtun, am affiliated with the Pashtun tribes of Afghanistan and Pakistan, but I carry a Pakistani passport because I'm a Pakistani citizen. Now, for me, it's easy to say because again, another complicated image. Tribes and sub-tribes and clans. Sometimes I even forget who am I because it's so confusing. As if this wasn't confusing enough, this was the strategy to fight this war. And I believe in 2010, this was the PowerPoint presented to General Stanley McChrystal. And I think that's what he said, that if we understand this slide, we will win the war. But first is we have to understand the slide. Not classical, confusing. There is no one good guy or bad guy. There is no favorable strategic outcome because there are so many players on war. Now, the cocktail conflict. So I wanted to show you this information to confuse you, to make sure that how complicated it is. And once I was giving a lecture, invited for a lecture at one of the universities, and they wanted me to talk about the war in Afghanistan. And I kept on thinking, how do I explain that in one word? And I was like, oh, cocktail. Now, what is a cocktail? Imagine for a second that there is a cup, which I'm a terrible at drawing, so I try to make it look like a cup. And imagine this is Afghanistan, or a cup. You put different drinks in there. And 5 or 6 different people take a sip. 2 things will happen. 1, let's say I take a sip, and I taste Coke or Pepsi or Fanta, any one of them. Either I only know that taste, or I want to know that taste. Which means I've spoken to military officials, religious experts, anthropologists, tribal experts, politicians. Everyone had their own version and interpretation and solution for victory in Afghanistan. Which means 2 things. Either they only knew that one taste, which they were experts in, or they wanted to know only one taste. That creates a conflict, which means, is it ethnic? Is it religious? Is it geopolitical? Is it heroin? Is it the neighbors? All these factors are ignored, only one is picked up. Or the idea that these people are crazy, they're lawless. I am from the lawless regions. Sometimes I become crazy, but most of the times I'm fine. The idea I have to be And I've been told, like, why do you guys hate us? When I tell people that I went to a Catholic school and a Protestant college, and then I got a little bit involved with BYU, so I have been around the religious parameters and stuff. Am I crazy sometimes? Yes. So the idea is, because of that reason, I have been told so many times by so many different people what the war in Afghanistan is and what is the solution. Because the person who was telling me, or the group who was telling me, wanted that solution, or they only knew that solution, and that's it. Which means the real solution is never seen, never understood, never observed. So if you don't understand the problem, if you can't spot the issue, you can't solve it. In law, the first thing you're taught in law school is issue spotting. IRAC. Not Iraq, IRAC. Issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion. So the first thing is spot the issue. And when you spot the issue, then you look at the legal rule. And when you have the legal rule, you try to apply the legal rule to the issue. That's your analysis. And then you conclude. That way, you will reach either right or wrong answer. You get points for your analysis. And if those analyses are accepted, you win the case. That's how the system works. But in this case, if everyone has their own issue, they try to use their own IRAC and things mess up. I remember way back in 2001 when I spoke about against the war in Afghanistan, or how this was a big problem because empires have Godspeed. Which war? First, you have to specify which war you're going to win, or which war you're trying to win. Only then can you be in a position to have a favorable strategic outcome. And the problem is that my favorable strategic outcome is different than the favorable strategic outcome of all the other parties involved. Generally, there are 4 wars taking place in Afghanistan. 4. War with the terrorists. I use the word terrorist broadly just to kind of indicate the 911 terrorists, just kind of so that it's simple. The war against terror scenario. So that's the one war. War within the region. We have Shia and Sunni scenarios. We have ethnic conflicts. We have the neighbors fighting over Afghanistan. That is within the region. Then the war within Afghanistan, which has always been on for centuries. And the global war. The global powers trying to have their monopoly over Afghanistan. So imagine 4 broad wars with sub-wars taking place in Afghanistan. How do you win the war when the war is like this? That is the $1 million question. That's a problem. It gets so complicated, and I have been in many discussions and environments where I have been told clear-cut solutions. Sometimes I was told that it's the easiest way to win the war in Afghanistan. Why don't we just nuke that place? Like, wow. Wow. Why don't we? Yeah, I was like, whoa. Why don't we just bulldoze that place? Well, the British tried. The British, the most modern army of that time, they went into Afghanistan, 16,000. They went in. Entering Afghanistan is easy. That's what has happened throughout centuries. Once you go in, you think you conquered it because you have captured the cities. But the real Afghanistan is not the cities.
It's the tribes, the tribal regions. And that's what triggers this whole idea of weak governments and strong societies. English tried 3 times, the Russians went in. Now we have the coalition. We are back on square one. Is Afghanistan any safer? Of course not. Of course not. When I look at all the conquerors who went through Afghanistan, the one conqueror which was successful was Alexander the Great. Because what he did, he made deals. Because that's how you go through Afghanistan or in the tribal areas. Because he made deals, he gave them honor. That's why every second or third city in that region is named after Alexander the Great in the native language. So, conflicts today are expensive, which means the cost, the budget, US is $4.407 trillion. That's the US budget for this year, right? And the war in Afghanistan, the cost is more than $1 trillion. This is the cost of the war in Afghanistan, and a loss of 231 US citizens, soldiers, and contractors. After this much money and this many thousands of deaths, the war, Afghanistan is still more messier than it was on September 10th, 2001. More people have died, hundreds of thousands of people have died. The war has shifted, not only in Afghanistan, shifted into Pakistan. I'm sure most of you, all of you, know about the drone warfare. I'm not going to go through that from that perspective. I'm going to explain that a little bit. So that is the cost of war in the future. Now, this brings us to another scenario. Wars are expensive. Wars are civil, which means air superiority in the wars of the present and the wars of the future is not going to be a real problem. Because the civil warriors are members of groups who are fighting that war. Their air defense capabilities or the technology will be minimal, which means NATO planes can fly with immunity in over Afghanistan. Nothing's going to happen. The problem is the cost. So, 2 things are happening. We are moving back. Technology is going back when it comes to war. The cost of flying a B-2 is $169,000 an hour. And so now US is going into the older platforms, which is propellers. And the cost is $2,000. So it's a strange thing that's happening. The classical war is going away. Navy is taking lots of money because oceans are going to be the next stage of global monopoly. Flying a stealth bomber is very expensive. The F-35 is one of the most expensive programs in, I believe, in the US military history, or I might be correct, in any weapons platform history. That's so expensive. So the idea is, you fly this plane and you kill a couple of terrorists or blow up a few mud houses or tents. Is it worth it? That's why I said, you know what, air superiority is there. Let's try to focus on the old wars, which is Vietnam idea, which is you have prop planes, the spot. So that's why the T-6 Texan might be the next stage, or even this plane, the one on the right, on the left that you see on the screen. This has been named as Bronco 2. Bronco 1 was used in Vietnam War, old plane. It's called Bronco 2 because of the symbolic nature. And this is developed by a South African company because it's cheaper, it's easier to fly, cheaper to fly. The Cold War
was to have faster, stronger planes. Now we are going to use slower, more stable planes to take care of the civil wars that are taking place on the ground. That's one thing. Drones. That sends us to a unique scenario. On one side, we are going to old technology. On the other side, we are going up in technology, which is drones, artificial intelligence on the battlefield. Why artificial intelligence? There was a time when data was limited. Less data was there. Now there's too much data. And when there's too much data, how do you analyze it? To understand that, let's look at the weapon systems. Human-in-the-loop weapons, human-on-the-loop weapons, and human-out-of-the-loop weapons. My favorite one is the last one, which I'm going to talk about. In the wars of the future. Human-in-the-loop weapons is like a drone today, which means the drone is flown over a battlefield, and the drone operator, or the pilot, is here in the US, or England, or is in a safe location. He or she flies it, acquires a target, fires at the target, and destroys it. Fine. They're safe. That is human in the loop. The second one is human on the loop, which means the weapon system itself acquires the target. And it gives certain time to the operator, because the weapon system is thinking much faster. Faster calculations, because the time is short. The phalanx, for example, the phalanx system on battleships or ground. When they see a threat, when they analyze it, the time is so short for a human to react that the systems fires on its own. But the human is in the loop, but the timing is very limited. So, but still, there is a human, or the Iron Dome system in Israel. When a weapon is fired, surface-to-surface weapon, the Iron Dome system gives a limited amount of time, maybe a few seconds, for the human to decide whether that is a legitimate target or not. And it fires on its own. The third one is human out-of-the-loop system, which means completely autonomous. Because calculation is so fast, target acquisition is so quick, that the systems cannot wait for a human to intervene or verify the target. So the more this happens, the more we start relying on artificial intelligence, the more complicated it gets. We have cocktail conflicts, technology in some aspects of the battlefield is going back, in other aspects is going way farther. So, as I mentioned, I teach law and international relations. So in law, there's always an act, intent, and causation. Someone must have done something where something happened. There's always someone's responsibility. So if a human is out of the loop in the modern battlefield or battlefield of the future, who is it? Because we have humanitarian laws, we have laws of war, the Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention, all those kind of things, the protocols. So if a machine thinks, fires a weapon, breaks a law of war or the laws of war, who is responsible? Is it a legal question? Is it the government which put the machine over there? Is it the company which made that machine? Is it the company which made the software? Is it the commander on the battlefield? Who is responsible? So if the machine is autonomous, if it's a thinking machine, this means the machine used its own logic to make a decision. It acquired the target,
it fired the weapon. The whole idea of artificial intelligence is someone else is responsible. How will the laws of war apply in the battlefield of the future? That is an issue. Complications. I like this picture. From one of my most favorite television show. I really like the classical one, but this was the new generation. Data. I call it the death by data. When post 9/11, the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, some of the phases were called death by PowerPoint, because everything was explained in PowerPoints, all the strategies, all the lines, all the confusions, and we said, well, it seems war is so easy, complicated, but easy. Now, data is the name of the character. The android himself, or itself, and the information which is bombarded at the decision makers. But are they really the decision makers? So I call it the death of data. For the laws of war to apply in this scenario, we have to understand life first, give that life a meaning and a presence. Only then can we give it responsibilities. 3 kinds of life, generally. Carbon-based, that's us and the animals, all of us, the DNA. Silicon-based, that is AI, artificial intelligence. Anytime I mention AI, the first question that comes to people's mind is Terminator, androids, robots, take over. That's, I mean, I'm not a scientist, I only look at the legal side of things. We might most likely are way far away from that stage yet. Why? Because machines have their own cosmology within which they reside. Multiverse. Carbon-based, confused, complicated. Silicon-based makes it even more confusing. Soul-based, spirit, which means a soul, inside. On the battlefield today, many of the battlefields, religion plays a very important role today, because religion in many of these battlefields is an identifying factor. The difference between me and the one I'm shooting at, or the one who's shooting me, is we are from different religions or different sects within a religion. That's why we kill each other. So this means that at any given moment, there are multiple cosmologies taking place at the same time. Why do I call it cosmologies? Imagine a machine, a drone, a machine, a system. A system, AI, artificial intelligence, is born or created. The creation is the date of birth. And it survives within its own parameters, the parameters of that machine or network or system. So that network or system is its cosmology, its universe, its known boundaries. We are in the classical system, which is universe created by Big Bang and all those things. So that's the classical ones. That's 2. The third one is religious, and different religions have their own different cosmologies. I teach a course on global law, and in that global law, we cover Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Tonic laws. When there were laws, when there were no societies, we cover all of those things. And all of them are based on some kind of religious or superstition, religion or superstition, which means their own cosmology, which means I'm a Muslim. So for me, there is the classical cosmology, but there's also religious cosmology, which means if I do something wrong, I go to hell. I've been warned since childhood, you do something wrong, you go to hell. I'm freaking out from hell. I don't want to go to hell. I'm constantly being reminded, if anything you do, hell is waiting for you. Now, does hell exist in
the classical cosmology? It doesn't. But when you look at religions, you look at Buddhism or Hinduism or the system of samsara where you're born and die to get again and again, all of those things happening, that is a different set of rules. And why am I using this over here? Because the best example, a holy warrior. Imagine for a second that there is an AI drone flying on a battlefield. The targets are humans, right? Some of them are fighting the war because of classical cosmology. Others are fighting the war for God or gods. This means you have one AI cosmology, you have classical cosmology, and you have religious cosmology all together at one battlefield. Confusing. In the classical war, this wasn't happening, but today it is. Think about a suicide bomber. Why is a suicide bomber blowing himself up or herself up? Afterlife. But again, suicide bombing is associated these days mostly with Islam. And when I teach students suicide bombings, I give the example of suicide bombings on a massive scale started in Sri Lanka. The first televised, the first recorded suicide bombing took place in Sri Lanka. The civil war that was going on over there. In many of these cases, it's not religion, but it is territory, ethnicity. But the person who is killing himself up is thinking that they are doing it because they're going to go and meet God. Let me give you an example of that, which means they are in their own state of mind. Suicide bombers, in Pakistan we had hundreds of cases of those. When they would blow themselves up, the suicide vest is over here, they put the wires, it blows up, it goes sideways because they have all these ball bearings they go around. The bombers were told to look up because in religious cosmology, heaven is up. We have always been told, I grew up with this idea, that heaven is up, hell is below. The classical Abrahamic concept of heaven and hell. So when a suicide bomber is going to meet God because he's killing other people who disagree with his cosmology, he looks up, the bomb blows up, the neck is chopped off, and the head would fly like a projectile, clean cut. It will fall down, it will be picked up by the government, scanned, the face is scanned, and the face is analyzed through a central database, and you could know who that person was. And that's how you investigate to try to find out how this person became radicalized, who were his friends, and all those kind of things. This was a problem for the terrorists. Then they said, there's a problem. When you meet God, you have to be humble. Religious cosmology. Because you are in a different set of rules. When you meet God, you face down. Because when you're humble, you don't look up, you look down. Yes, heaven is up there, you're going to go there eventually, but why not look down? Why? Because when you look down and the bomb blows up, the face is destroyed. So this way, it is impossible to identify who that person was. There was a case in my hometown, the town of Banu, where a suicide bomber stopped a public transport, women and children, men in there, and he had a vest on, and he starts driving that van. I've heard this story. He starts driving it, and the goal is to find a military vehicle and ram that public transport into it, and while he's doing that, he blows himself up, which means people in that transport die, and the soldiers, according to him, would die. After a few minutes of driving, suddenly, and that bomb never blew up, so that's why people were there to tell the story. When he starts driving in a way as if he is trying to avoid hitting someone on the road. He was so into this that he thought he could actually see the 72 virgins standing in the middle of the road. And he did not want to hit any of those because he wanted all 72, not kill a few while going up. So he just wanted to make sure he hit all those examples. So he tries to work because in his mind, that is the concept. That is the kind of fighter that we are facing on the battlefield today. And where was this being fought? This was not on the battlefield, but in the cities. Because now we have multiple minds spread out within cocktail conflicts. Makes it way more complicated. To explain this, I once wrote a paper on this one. Schrodinger's cat, or Schrodinger's cat. I'm a foreigner, so I have an accent. Schrodinger's cat, Austrian physicist. It's a famous thought experiment, which is someone in two states at the same time. And when I knew about this, when I would study this, I tried to combine this with a holy warrior. How someone can be in two states at the same time. Which means, for example, religion is a contract, which means your god or gods or goddesses offer you a contract. I'm a lawyer, so I'll always have to throw a contract in there. They offer you a contract and you accept it. Offer, acceptance, and consideration are the requirements for a contract. So God offers you religion. You live your life according to that offer, and in return, you go to a place which is heavenly or heaven-like. That is the consideration. Now, someone fights a holy war is within religious cosmology, whatever religion there might be. I wanted to put a slide, but it seemed too gruesome, of some of the extreme practices in different religions, but I thought it's too gruesome. So I only leave those kind of things for my students in class because they have to see them. If they don't, no grades. So anyways, so I can force them over there. So in this one, a holy warrior blows himself up, thinking that he's going to go to heaven. He goes and he meets God in another dimension, different cosmology. And if God is pleased with his work, he goes to heaven. And if God is not pleased with his work, he goes to hell. What does that mean? That means that the action which took place in classical cosmology, the result is in religious cosmology. Which means the victory, what is the purpose of victory for a holy warrior? To please God. And he or she went up there and found out that God is not pleased with them. This means they have lost that war. But the problem is, they are in a dimension they can't call back their comrades and say, hey, you're fighting the wrong war, don't do it. They can't do that. So when someone, a holy warrior in any religion, dies, he or she is in two states, the way this cat is. And what is this experiment? Thought experiment. Is a box. You put a cat in there, a living cat, and generally it goes like this. You put nuclear material, and there's a Geiger which is going to read any kind of nuclear decay. And the moment the Geiger reads nuclear decay, a hammer is going to strike a beaker which is full of poisonous gas. Thought experiment. Now, nuclear decay, as a layperson I know, that it can happen any moment. It is so random, there is no prediction. So I see the cat goes in, it's alive, the nuclear material is there, I close the lid. Now, at that moment, I can rightly say the cat is alive and dead at the same time. Why? Because did the nuclear material decay? It was picked up by the Geiger, the hammer was struck, the gas was released. I don't know. So if someone asks me, is the cat alive or dead? I have to say it's alive and dead in two states at the same time. That is called the Schrodinger's cat. So a holy warrior, in that sense. If someone asks me, is he or she a holy warrior, a dead person, when they went up? I can say they are holy and unholy at the same time.
Because they're holy if God is pleased with them, they're unholy if God is not pleased with them. But since I don't know that, this can be so random, I cannot predict that. So the problem is that the war of the future will have extreme technologies and primitive technologies and religious cosmology like this cat over here, or the idea of this cat. And that is the battlefield of the future that we are coming across. So two states at the same time. So this means that in most of the conflicts in the world that we see today, the wars will be fought on one side on two dimensions. One, here on Earth, but the decisions will be made in heaven or hell. So there is no victory or defeat in the wars of the future. The more religious it gets, the more confusing it's going to become, and the more difficult to have a favorable strategic outcome for those conflicts. The goal is to try to not turn a conflict, a territorial conflict, a conflict of resources into a religious conflict, the way it happened in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was not a religious conflict. It's a war on terror. The example would be Guantanamo Bay. I teach global laws, which and then war and terrorism, and I teach laws of war in there. So, in laws of war, if someone is a prisoner of war and they are lawful combatants, when the war ends, they will be released, because that's the system. So if there's a prisoner, because there's a war against terror, that war can never end. So if someone has been caught on a battlefield, which is the whole country or regions of the world, and that person is detained, and that person is in the lockup, that person might never get released, because there is no end date to this conflict. The way there will be no end date to the conflicts, civil conflicts, which we are going towards. The word that is used is called mission creep. Mission creeps on you. I call it the war creep, because that's what happened in Vietnam. That's what happened in Afghanistan. When NATO went into Afghanistan, the idea was done. Taliban are toppled. We have won the war. It was all honky-dory. Everything was fun. The first year and a half. It's when, because people thought that now Afghanistan will become a nation which will have a non-war or non-civil war economy. It didn't happen. Before you know it, the war crept up. And when in a war there's no start date, you keep on denying the existence of a war, and when you realize the war is upon you, it's too late. It has turned into a civil conflict. Can't stop. Yes?
I'm just going to quickly say it's almost 9:30.
Oh.
So if we want a chance for questions, we should do that. We have about 30 seconds.
I didn't see your clock, so I'm sorry.
No worries.
I got a bit excited.
Warned you. Are there any questions?
How do these wars compare to the religious wars in Europe in the 15 and 1600s? Because a lot of those wars were a religious-based and territorially based and resource-based. And I don't see a great deal of difference, except in the technologies that are used, between the 100 Years' War and some of these.
Now, that's the reason you have to understand that. Recently, last week, a student asked me this question. I was talking about terrorism in the United States, and he asked me, so would crusades be terrorism? Or could they be proper? I was like, well, St. Thomas said that if a war is justified based on Christian principle,
that is a justified war. But the wars in the past, the 100-Year War and all those kind of things, those were massive compared to the wars that we see today, because today we have much smaller groups, which means it's difficult to control them. A larger group you can control because there is a hierarchy in leadership. For example, the Taliban in Pakistan or Taliban in Afghanistan, at any given moment, there might be 60 or 70 groups which are affiliated with that Taliban word. And those groups might change loyalties at any moment. So if you ask me, who are the Taliban? Do I say they are one group? No. They are a mixture of so many groups who keeps on changing sides, which means it's very difficult to control, to have one large group. In the wars in Europe, the idea was if it's religious, the Pope plays a very important role. In the wars of today, it doesn't, because most of this chaos, most of these wars in many of these regions are Islamic. Islamic plays a big role in there. Islamic interpretation. Now, it's not just Islam, it's interpretation of those wars, which means that there is no one central figure in Islam. The whole goal of Islam was there shouldn't be any hierarchy. There shouldn't be a central church or the central mosque of Islam. Everyone is on their own. They don't even need clergy in real life. You don't need clergy. So everyone decides themselves. The wars in Europe had a command structure. So that was different. But today, there is none. Today, anyone can declare themselves to be the righteous Muslims, and they can start the fight based on religion. So that is the main difference, as I see, compared to the wars today. Yes?
Just have a question. You mentioned Guantanamo Bay. It's my understanding the United States is not declared war. I mean, they're just over there helping. It's not a declared war. Therefore, my question is, how can, and they have no right to writ of habeas corpus. So I wonder how they can keep these people forever with not even declaring war.
Okay. Now, that's interesting. When 9/11 happened in the beginning, you guys, you will remember, the word mentioned was, we are at war. 9/11 was declared as an act of war. For the first few days, it went well, proper, right? But then there's illegals, and I'm sorry, I'm again going to the legal side of things. Why is it illegal? Because imagine, if it's an act of war, then the property or destruction that happened because of 9/11, will insurance cover that?
Oh.
Do you have war insurance in New York? Act of war insurance? Now that is going to be a problem. So that's why it changed. So this is like, we are at war, but it's similar to the war against drugs and all those kind of things. Now, that's one side of it. Guantanamo Bay, when you are in US mainland, in the United States, US Constitution applies. And when US Constitution applies, you have the Bill of Rights. Habeas, within approximately 48 hours, you'll be presented in front of a judge. Now, the Guantanamo Bay is kept as a gray area on purpose, because if those people are declared enemy combatants, legitimate enemy combatants, then you have to legitimize what war is. If it's not war, these people can't be enemy combatants. If they're not enemy combatants, then they will be considered as criminals. If they are criminals, they have to be presented in front of a judge. And the issue is, the judge, in most cases, might release them because the laws of evidence are really strict. I teach the laws of evidence class. So I always do a thought experiment. What if Osama bin Laden was captured alive? And the more I think about that case, the more confusing it gets, because how will all the evidence gathered in Afghanistan and in Yemen or in Sudan and all those places, how will that evidence go through the scrutiny of hearsay evidence into the courts of law over here? Big problem. So that's why sometimes you hear the word war, prisoners of war for Guantanamo, sometimes you don't, but it's more of a hush-hush thing. But if those are brought here, then they have to be taken in front of a judge. But it's a tricky situation.
There.
So it's 9:35 now. I think we should probably give everybody a break.
Thank you very much.
Starts at 9:45. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.